Hello world of YouTube. As I learned last year, making a record's hard. Making an album that feels cohesive and well constructed is a challenge. You know, to make an album with themes and lyrical topics that feel cohesive, whether you're staying within a genre or not, is a bit of an undertaking. So to do that 3 times consecutively feels like a feat to me now. You know, that feels like something that's unattainable, unquantifiable. Yet it happens all the time in music. Bands and artists seem to make it look easy to make record after record after record that either consistently maintain the themes discussed on the previous record but expand upon them, dip into other genres altogether and abandon their previous, or just make the same if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of record. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways artists can go from one release to the next. But I took it upon myself after reading a tweet that said, name a better 3-album run than the Benz, OKC, and Kid A couple of months ago, and I made a list of what I would say are the 11 best 3-album runs. Now, while looking into this, I actually found a handful of 3-album runs, and there's a lot of them that didn't end up making this list, which are listed in the description as honorable mentions. Some of these have records that are in my favorites of all time, and they were just slightly edged out, whether because I felt like the achievements of other artists were more impressive than the ones listed in the description, or I just didn't think that it was as good as the ones above it. But yeah, these are 11, what I would say are the best 3-album runs in music, for one reason or another, and why.
Names I could get it on my eyelids. 2 a.m. I don't need all that energy, they just fuck up my shit. Right next on the chiropractor.
2017 seemed to be the year for Brockhampton. It was the year that they burst onto the scene, and they did what isn't done in music often: successfully release 3 records in a calendar year. They aren't the only group to do this, but they were the first in at least a while to pull it off and have it pay off for them in spades. The Saturation Trilogy is a fantastic showcase of each member of Brockhampton's skills and attributes as a conglomerate. It features both earnest, heartfelt lyrics and some of the most hype shit I've heard in a long time. I've talked about this trilogy a little bit on my year-end wrap-up for 2017, but goddamn, these records all still hold up. And to those that say that it's because of one specific member, Iridescence is also a really impressive record that expands upon these Saturation records beautifully, but I think that for them to come off into the scene with all of these records and have them be wildly successful, and not different, but different from each other under the same umbrella, is very impressive.
Hell of operator. 2, 3, 4, take the elevator at the hotel. We started living in an
You know, the White Stripes' debut is a bit of a rough start for them, but damn if they didn't improve on that tenfold with Beastie and just keep the train rolling through White Blood Cells and Elephant. While they got more and more harnessed as each record went along, I don't blame them for that. I think that the tighter songwriting and song composition and more accessible songwriting and song composition fits the evolution of the White Stripes. They're a back-to-basics type of band, so it only made sense that eventually they started writing very catchy rock tunes. They're still kick-ass records, and they all still have their own phenomenal strengths from each other, but the natural progression of Beastie through Elephant feels fully realized, and White Blood Cells, I feel like, is an integral middle piece of that. The production beefs up just a little bit on each release, and I feel like is a big component of that accessibility growing with each record as well. It definitely feels more refined. They're just like fine-tuning this machine into a perfect rock duo, and It's fucking amazing.
Then I order someone to bring them fight good. They vow soon that I'ma get up, filling up my.
Oh, yes, we can.
I can dig rap.
Kendrick Lamar is a fucking mastermind, and he proved that by starting his career in the prominent culture masterfully with Section 80. It is a super conscious, rooted in West Coast and jazz rap odyssey that I think has aged like fine fucking wine. Section 80 is actually my favorite Kendrick Lamar record. It has a lot of very prolific writing for rap in 2011. It has songs that still feel very relevant today in a very strong way, and it's amazing that people don't talk about the cultural relevance of Section 80 in 2019, because it is hands down the best Kendrick Lamar record and the one that's aged so fucking well. Not to say the two follow-ups haven't aged as well, because there's a reason why it's on this list. To take some of the abstract ideas and production style seen on Section 80, pull it together into a super tight West Coast throwback in Good Kid, Mad City, and still have it be this lyrical odyssey because it's a concept story record, is amazing. And then to take that and just re-flourish it out and kind of expand on the ideas seen on Section 80 into this super lush, pristine jazz odyssey with a lot of that West Coast throwback still there, it's fucking amazing. And then to also inject modern ideals on tracks like All Right masterfully is impressive. He takes the idea of a concept record and fleshes it out even more on T-Pab and just makes a much more artful project. And it's insane to me. I mean, Kendrick Lamar in just fucking 4 years made 3 of the best hip-hop records of the decade. 3 instant classics that show his versatility as a writer, his versatility as a rapper, because his flows are so varied across each project, and his ability to write such catchy songs. I mean, especially on Good Kid, Mad City, half of that record is just full of earworms, and it's infectious. So you probably could have guessed I was going to put a Beck run on here. I mean, Beck is one of my favorite artists. You guys know that. I've done a discography review on him. And the only reason why I didn't do the other one I was going to do, which was Mellow Gold, One Foot in the Grave, Odelay, is because this 3-album run is far more impressive. I mean, even though Wero isn't my favorite of that style, it's still got a style that is like Odelay. It's just kind of a watered-down version of it. But to go from Midnight Vultures, this funk record that's really tongue-in-cheek and sassy, and is a style that Beck has never even done again, to go from that to Sea Change, which is this lush, personal feeling, atmospheric folk record, to then go to a sound that is unlike the other two, this kind of alternative hip-hop, slacker, alt-rock sound that was like Odelay, is impressive and exemplifies why I think Beck is one of the best musicians to come out of the 21st century. I fucking love Beck, and I think that he transitioned into the 2000s brilliantly with these 3 records. And the songs on all of them are great. I've talked about these records already, so if you want to see more in-depth opinions about the albums themselves, the Beck discography review is up here. But yeah, I love this run purely because it is so, each record is so different from each other, yet incredibly well put together.
What do they all come? Teachers are taught me.
The Beatles are going to be on here. You know, that's there's no doubt about that. And again, like Beck, the only reason why this isn't higher, even though the Beatles are, again, one of my favorite, like, rock bands, is because Rubber Soul isn't my favorite Beatles record, but Revolver and neither is Sgt. Pepper's. But again, to look at this run, it's kind of impressive to see. You know, to go from Rubber Soul, to expand upon that, because Rubber Soul is kind of proto-Revolver. Those two records work really well together. You know, they have similar lyrical ideas and similar atmospheres, but then to go from those two and go to Sgt. Pepper's makes no fucking sense, but it's amazing. I like that Sgt. Pepper's is kind of a simple, stripped-back pop record with a lot of weird, nuanced instrumentation. In the same vein that I said about White Blood Cells, I feel like Sgt. Pepper's couldn't exist without Revolver, because that's not to say it doesn't transition into Sgt. Pepper's well. I mean, there's tracks like Yellow Submarine, and there's some weird shit on Tomorrow Never Knows that could be considered like proto Sgt. Pepper's sounds. It's just not as apparent that they would make that kind of record after Revolver as, say, an Elephant after White Blood Cells, if that makes any sense. Revolver is a record with some weighty subject matter and some really bleak shit. Yeah, there's some fun shit like Yellow Submarine, but goddamn does this get fucking bleak. Rubber Soul is still a really good record. Like, that's still like an 8 out of 10 record to me. But Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's are both, like, classics in their own regard. Whether you like Sgt. Pepper's or not, it's a fucking classic. And Revolver is a great centerpiece of it all, because it's the apex of the sound that they were exploring in Revolver, and then a proto version of stuff that they were, like the weird trippy stuff that they were doing later on down the road. It's great. It's a fucking phenomenal run.
So if your feet is frozen, I'ma die to see.
Now, all of these records are in my favorites of all time. Again, the reason why this isn't higher is because the rest of this list is exactly like that. All of these records upcoming are on my favorite of all time list. But I personally think the Gorillaz had a perfect run in the 2000s to take this sort of ominous trip hop that had kind of an optimistic twist, to spin that into a much bigger genre gauntlet on Demon Days without losing a lot of that hip-hop love that you planted on your first record, to then abandon that completely into an electro-pop love letter, is mind-blowing. And again, they don't lose some of those hip-hop tendencies. I mean, they collaborate with like De La Soul and Mos Def and Snoop Dogg on Plastic Beach, so it's not lost. But like, the soundscapes are all very different on all three of these records, because they incorporate so many different genre fusions and so many different guest artists in there that it reads like a mess, but it listens like a masterpiece. I adore all three of these records. They're all modern classics to me. I think that Damon Albarn pulled together just some really cool shit here. You know, I respect the experimentation on these records, and they don't lose any sense of accessible songwriting underneath all of these different dips and genres and stuff. Plus, if you're doing this evolution of sound, Demon Days does a good job at having ideas that they then flourish out on Plastic Beach, like on tracks like Dare. Like I said, I'm a Mastodon discography review, which if you want to check that out, it's right there. I love all these records. While I think Blood Mountain isn't as good as the records that sandwich between, it's still the best transitional record they've ever written. They combine the sludginess from Leviathan with the more intricate and detailed musicianship that's seen on Crack the Sky. You know, it's also their most animalistic and visceral sounding record, you know, and they, again, transition from their sludgy roots to the prog side fantastically in this run. You know, each record has its own type of style and character and feel, yet they all still feel intrinsically tied to the band's roots in very strong ways, whether it be vocal performances or guitar tones. You know, all these records are still unanimously Mastodon, but they grow into a progressive metal juggernaut in this transition, you know, because even Leviathan has seeds of the progressive playing that's seen on Crack the Sky. It's just buried in these more sludge-style productions that I think work, and I think that's why, like I said in my review, that's my favorite Mastodon record for that reason. But, I mean, man, these are all just, again, modern metal classics, all three of them, and I think that they kill it on here. And again, exemplifies what makes Mastodon one of my favorite bands. Now, like Beck, I had 2 different album runs to throw up for Rush. I was going to do 2112 through Hemispheres, because I like A Farewell to Kings personally. I think it's a great record. But I ultimately went with Hemispheres to Moving Pictures because it's the more impressive change. Because 2112, Farewell to Kings, and Hemispheres are just 3 prog rock albums. They're all 3 classic prog rock albums, and that would more fit into the if it ain't broke, don't fix it style of a three-peat. But to transition from Hemispheres into Permanent Waves into Moving Pictures, which Moving Pictures and Permanent Waves have songs that feel like they're still tied to the progressive roots. There's no denying the songwriting on those 2 records is a lot catchier, and the songs themselves are much tighter from a songwriting perspective, but they don't lose any of their musicianship in that. In fact, the musicianship is almost a little more enhanced because of it, because they're doing more. You know, Geddy has the synths along with his bass to play. Neil's playing is still masterful, as is Alex's. Like, this is still Rush being their best. But I feel like it's more impressive to me for them to transition from Hemispheres into Moving Pictures without writing shittier songs. You know, there's other prog bands that tried to get a little more accessible, like Yes and Genesis. And while I like some of the catchy Genesis era stuff, like, I think Invisible Touch is still a great fucking record. And Yes, kind of in the same vein, they are nowhere near as successful as Rush were. And I think that's a big reason why it is a much more impressive run to me as well in hindsight, because these other 2 are still very classic records to me. I mean, you guys know I've talked about Moving Pictures a lot, but Permanent Waves and Hemispheres are also 2 of my favorite albums of all time. So, yeah.
She bought from
Yeah, the Bends, OKC, and Kene are only number 3 on this list. And you could call, again, bias as to why the top 2 are the top 2. It's all about preference, baby. But there's no denying. The Bends, OKC, and Kene are still an impressive run. You know, the Bends, disputed or not, is very at least tied to the Britpop sound of the 90s. That they then evolved into OKC, which is this art rock, alt, odyssey, that they completely abandoned and made into Kid A, which is one of the most dramatic turns a band has ever made, in my opinion. I mean, talk about Beck's different genre jumps all you want. To go from OKC to Kid A is insane. I mean, I know there's lots of stories of Kid A. There's like 200 hours of material that was recorded for it. The band almost broke up. You can tell in that record, there's a lot going on. But it's respectable for how ambitious it is and how different in scope it is from OKC. And how insanely different it is from the Bends. Like, it's amazing. You know, while OKC makes sense with the Bends, Kid A doesn't make any sense with the other 2. And they're all 3 just impeccable records. Like, I love the Bends still. I know some in the popular, Zenith say that it hasn't aged that well. I kind of disagree. I think a lot of the guitars on it are so very good and got a lot of bite to them. And I like Tom's performance on the record personally. But, yeah, I mean, goddamn. Yes, 2 of my favorite albums of all time are in this transition. Pretty Hate Machine being my favorite record of all time, Nine Inch Nails being my favorite band, and The Downward Spiral also being in my top 10. And yeah, The Fragile is also in my top 100, but it's not my third favorite Nine Inch Nails record. While I respect the ambition behind the transition from Pretty Hate's 80s synth-inspired industrial tinge stuff to the all-out industrial experimentation that goes on The Downward Spiral to then flesh that out into a double album on The Fragile, impeccable. All 3 albums still full of just nihilism, anger, bleakness, and hate that is fully realized. The number 1 pick is just the best example of the if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is the best example of we're going to take a sound and fine-tune it and flesh it out and experiment it into this fully realized machine. But, man, I just really love the number one run. Again, you know I love Trent. I've talked about Trent to death. He's one of my favorite artists and a big inspiration to me, as is each of these records for their own respective reasons. But I can't give it the number one spot personally. I don't think it's the best 3-album run. The ultimate, if it ain't broke, don't fix it formula. Rage Against the Machine's 3 records are some of the most passionate, intense rock music to come out of the decade that is the 90s. While a lot of their contemporaries in their genre do not capture the same anger and intensity and passion that this band does, this is just record after record after record of pure perfection. It is so angry, so energizing, such vitriol of the modern world that it is just amazing. I love this band, as some of you may know, and I still think that anytime I listen to this record, it's impressive to see what little changes they make to their guitars and bass and drums work. They all work. The songwriting, just, even though it gets a little catchier as it goes along, it works. You know, shit to just scream out of your window at 12 in the afternoon. There's so much good shit on here, and it's just the best 3-album run that modern music has certainly seen, in my opinion. Just so good. So fucking angry in all the right ways. I love this thing, man. It's so good. God, it just... Rage Against the Machine, they... Like, I get why they stopped making music, because they kind of just kept it angry and consistently angry the whole time. And it's impressive, but damn if it wouldn't be draining to make these 3 records, because you can feel every hit, every note, and I think it works. And I think that's why it's my favorite album run of all time. And that's my list. What did you think of it? What's your favorite 3-album run? Are there some that I missed, even in the honorable mentions, that you wish I would have talked about? Let me know. I'm going to get out of here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting. I have been Viral Rat. You guys have good days, lives, and situations. And I'll see you another day.